This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have us tonight with us once again. Dr. Buck Melton, thank you for being with us.
Greetings.
Buck. Well, now we could go into the rumors about your running for president. Now, can you absolutely say that you've elected not to do it?
If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. I've been trying to deflect this back to you. You were the one.
Right now, Buck, so, I'm a little more ambivalent.
This is your year.
I'm a little ambivalent, and that's going to be a springboard for our conversations. I'm a little ambivalent with the way that the whole system is functioning in the country. And I will assume that one of the two candidates become president. And I would say one of the candidates, I won't say which one, seems to be a little on the edge in some issues, a little spooky, a little on the edge, and one could imagine issues occurring. And the other candidate may have a little ideas about getting some extra shekels out there. So each of the candidates have their flaws, as we all do. I mean, I won't say let him without sin cast the first stone. We all have our flaws. But the wisdom of our founding fathers, they put in process, and along with their great checks and balances, the idea of impeachment. So the legislative body can remove executive powers, including the president, if they violate certain norms. And I know that during President Clinton's little problems he had, you really were quite an expert on the subject. Can you talk a little bit about if one of these two people become the president, or someone else presumably, and they really run amok, how is our system going to prevent excesses from occurring? How are we going to be protected? How are the American people going to be protected from an executive that's overreaching?
Well, I'd like to say we've got good, strong protections in place, but I'm really not sure if that is the case. Partly because we have become so extraordinarily partisan in the last 40 to 50 years, really since the Vietnam and Watergate eras. We've seen a new low in partisanship. And the way that impeachment works, and I'll be happy to get into that later, it really requires a good bit of solidarity on the part of Congress, or specifically the Senate. And so it would take something truly extraordinary that would transcend partisanship, that everyone would have to agree that, for instance, in the case of one of our prospective presidents, this person is completely off the deep end and is going to involve us in a nuclear war. I mean, no hyperbole. Or with the other prospective candidate, this person is clearly ill and incapable of discharging her duties.
Yes.
So just to pick two examples.
Now, what happens? I mean, I'm no expert on the subject at all, but isn't there some kind of law, or there's at least some tension if the president becomes disabled? I mean, if let's suppose one of the presidential candidates, let's suppose, had a nervous breakdown, just to throw that possibility out there. I mean, I guess politicians have nervous breakdowns.
Yes.
What would happen? I mean, would the vice president take over? How is power passed on when a president is incapacitated?
Yes, and this is completely separate from the impeachment situation, and I can't even remember the name of which number amendment it is. I think it's 25 or 23, and it was an amendment that was passed in the wake of the John F. Kennedy assassination, which really got people thinking, what about very quick presidential succession or presidential incapacity in the face of an impending nuclear strike?
Yes.
And the president himself can say, I am incapacitated, or I'm going to be incapacitated. I believe it was our first Bush, George H.W., who first used that provision. He wrote the cabinet and said, I'm going to be under anesthesia for the next 6 hours.
Right.
And in that case, the vice president will become acting president. That's actually a title now based on the amendment. Or what if the president himself either can't do that or won't do that? Then I believe the provisions are that a majority of the cabinet can transmit to the Congress that this man is, or woman as the case may be, is clearly incapacitated. And so once again, you have an acting president.
Well, let me propose a hypothetical.
Yes.
I mean, if we can remember, Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, and his wife was basically running the country.
Yes.
If by chance Hillary Clinton was the president and she had some substantial health problems, could Bill be the secret puppeteer that would be running the country as sort of just more or less acting as her surrogate to?
Yes.
I mean, so when under those circumstances would a person be declared disabled, or is there a bright line in regards to that?
There's probably not a bright line for two reasons. Number one, it's just up to the judgment of the cabinet and of Congress. And secondly, since it's never really been done before, you're into virgin territory. I'm not sure if virgin territory is the right way to put it with the Clintons, but my Freudian slip is showing. But that raises another interesting question, and this is why constitutional law is so interesting, that according to the 22nd Amendment, Bill Clinton is ineligible to be anything. But if he is puppeteer, can you say that in practical terms, if not in formal terms, he's doing an Edith Wilson sort of situation?
Right.
So very interesting, and obviously the Constitution, even the more recent amendments, are not designed with a husband and wife formal team in mind. That was just not the way that the founders thought.
That's actually sort of what's happening here, is that, which is an issue about how that would work out a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, it's a pretty unusual set of circumstances, and we'll just have to see. Well, let's suppose that we'll maybe talk about the president really blundering, doing something pretty bad. It takes a long time to do something. I mean, if it appeared that maybe one of the candidates was elected president, and on television, that person just seemed to be absolutely nutty. The whole country was watching the televised speech, and the person just seemed, shall we say, psychotic.
Yes.
What would happen? I mean, the person is not obviously ill, but the person seems to be, and the whole country sees the person to be demented, or something is wrong with this person, and the person has all this power. That's extremely difficult to do anything about, isn't it? I mean, how would that work?
Well, we've actually had a situation when that happened before, and it's a big question mark, because the constitutional standard for impeachment is ancient language coming out of England, that the president, vice president, and all civil officers are subject to impeachment for, and here I quote, treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And psychosis would not seem to fit into that.
If the person were merely crazy,
yes,
just absolutely bonkers,
that would,
and had his or her hand on the nuclear trigger, there would be nothing that could be done.
Theoretically, yes, but as I say, we've had a situation before, not with nuclear weapons, but the second person ever impeached under the U.S. Constitution, a federal, not executive branch, but a federal judge by the name of John Pickering, who served New England, I want to say New Hampshire, but a New England judge. And he had been an illustrious jurist and member of the Revolution in his state, and was appointed to the federal bench, I believe, by George Washington, certainly in the 1790s. He was a Federalist, a member of the ruling political party of the 1790s. By 1803, it was clear that something was wrong with Pickering. Perhaps it was Alzheimer's, perhaps it was dementia.
Yes.
He was very clearly inebriated and drinking a lot on the bench, and his behavior on the bench was bizarre.
Right.
And Congress, which by that time was Republican rather than Federalist, decided we need to make a test case out of this guy. And so he was impeached, and he was tried, and he was convicted and removed, essentially for public drunkenness. not for insanity or any sort of mental instability, but everybody knew that was why.
So that would be a misdemeanor, I guess you'd say. Public drunkenness was.
Yeah, well, high crimes and misdemeanors doesn't really mean what we would think of today as felonies and misdemeanors. Nobody really knows what the phrase means. That's one of the big questions. So, for instance, what if, to take our incumbent president, what if President Obama, took Air Force One to Tahiti and then spent the rest of his term? Let's say we're only in his first term. It's 2010, and he just goes to Tahiti and he sits on the beach sipping Mai Tais with a little umbrella. And refusing to his duties, but he's still collecting his pay. Is that a high crime or misdemeanor?
Well, it depends. And what I'm
not illegal.
What I'm sort of getting at is, it appears that the aggregation of power by the executive branch is enormous.
It is
more than
indeed.
anyone's ever imagined.
Yes.
So the power that, and particularly I think President Obama is saying, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We have a lot of things that we are going to do, and we have to do it for the good of the country, and I'm just going to do it. And as this soap bubble expands, I mean, it sets a precedent for other people to do whatever they wish with the power of executive order. And if the person has any kind of intellectual flaw or emotional flaw, and it doesn't look like it's easy, that powerful person, it would be hard to check that person, would it not? Or I guess the courts might try and do something?
Well, it would take an exercise of political will. And the Supreme Court recently did hem in a little bit the power of executive action regarding Obama's refusal to enforce a few provisions of federal law. But generally speaking, neither Congress nor the courts seem inclined to limit presidential prerogative.
Right.
So the first step would be to develop the political will to do that. It could have been that case. We could have seen impeachment develop theoretically into something very close to a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons. It did not develop in that direction.
Now let's talk about that. So other countries have a way of disposing of the leader that it appears to be off the rails. And they would just have a big vote, and if enough people crossed over to say, we just don't have confidence, there's nothing, the person's not evil or wicked or anything else particularly, and we don't have to prove that the person is insane or has committed a crime. It's just that we don't believe he's doing the correct job, and then they can just take the person out at that point, and we have another election. And that seems like a reasonable alternative that's missing from our system.
Yes. Well, it's not quite, I wouldn't say reasonable. It's the difference between a presidential system and a parliamentary system. And with a parliamentary system, the chief executive is, to put it in a sinister sort of Victorian way, the chief executive is the creature of the legislature, that they put him in and they can take him out. And that is seen as a good thing if you like a parliamentary system. And actually, you mentioned Wilson and I mentioned Obama. I think that both Woodrow Wilson and Barack Obama would have preferred to be, and would in fact have been, a better prime minister than president. Because one advantage you have as a prime minister in a parliamentary system is that within certain bounds, the legislature does become yes men. Right up to the point when they decide they don't like the way the policy's going, which is what you're talking about.
Yes.
A presidential system attempts to reduce the power of both branches by segregating them from each other. That the president is not responsible to Congress, and the Congress is not responsible to president.
Yes. So. Well, now, just to sort of a general interchange here, we talk mostly about the president, but presumably other executive officials of the executive branch could be impeached.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, they could be.
Can that happen to judges in the judicial branch?
It has, the most frequent target of federal impeachment has in fact been judges, although there is some controversy in certain quarters as to whether or not judges should be subject to impeachment. As a matter of historical fact, they have been subject to impeachment. So we've had somewhere between 12 and 18 federal impeachments, depending on how you count. And the vast majority of those have been of federal judges.
Now, what about, let's see, a high official in the cabinet? I mean, I don't know, someone that's, well, the Secretary of State.
Yes.
And the Secretary of State is doing something. We had the Benghazi affair for Hillary Clinton, and there's some mumbling about, well, we can't let this happen. Or the head of the IRS, there's been some mumbling about doing something about that. Is the process the same as for the president? Would you have the Senate would go through the Senate?
Yes.
Same exact process.
Yes, the way the process basically works, and we have in fact gone after a cabinet official in the past that way. Secretary of War James, I'm not sure how he'd pronounce it, Belknap or Belknap, probably the more Scottish way of doing it, in the 1870s. The process was not completed with him. He resigned before. But essentially impeachment, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. People think that impeach means to throw out, which is not the case. Impeachment actually is more of an analog of indictment. It is a formal charging with wrongdoing. In our system, the House of Representatives does the impeaching or the presentation of charges by a simple majority vote. And then the Senate serves as a trial body, as judge and jury, much in the same way as you see. It's a vestige of the House of Lords, if you will. And here is the trick, and this is why I said it's not a very good safeguard these days. It takes a 2/3 supermajority vote to convict. And as long as the Senate is closely divided, close to 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, if all parties are playing politics, it's going to be impossible to get a conviction. So, but yes, that is the same system that is, it doesn't matter who the target is, a federal judge, a president, a cabinet officer, or a high administrative officials. That's how it would work.
Now, how much protection does a high executive official in our government have, let's say, against criminal charges? Someone, I don't know, let's say the candidate, one of the presidential candidates has some kind of anything, indiscretion with a young girl, and she prefers charges against that person. And then can the person then go to jail and be taken out of office by a regular criminal arrangement? What would happen then?
We've got a precedent for that too, although once again not in the executive branch. In, I believe the year was 1986, a federal judge in, I want to say Mississippi, Walter Nixon. It's interesting how how you keep seeing the same names pop up in impeachments, Chase and Nixon. Walter Nixon was, or was it Claiborne? No, Claiborne was out in Nevada, and Nixon, these happened about the same time. Harry Claiborne and Walter Nixon were both federal judges who were charged with criminal violations. One, I think, was bribery. They were tried, they were convicted, they went to jail, and they were still sitting federal judges because federal judges are effectively, not quite technically, but effectively lifetime appointments. The only way Congress could figure out to stop these convicted criminals from continuing to take the American taxpayers' money was to impeach them and to convict them. And they were both, in fact, convicted and removed from office after their conviction.
It appears, I mean, it's relatively common for legislators to get into some kind of trouble one way or the other for money. I mean, it seems to me that at least we've seen the governors of states have gone to prison. I mean, that's pretty notorious in Illinois. And so, and I'm assuming there have been people in Congress that have had some criminal trouble and have gone to prison. And they've basically gone out of they've lost their position, have they not, once they're in prison or not, if you're in the legislature?
Well, yeah, that's a different matter. Probably the first example would be under the Alien and Sedition Acts when Congressman Matthew Lyon was in jail. So yes, you would continue to serve out your term. There's only been one case of a member of Congress being impeached, a United States Senator, William Blunt, and he actually was. By the time the impeachment was preferred, he was out of office. He had been expelled by the Senate. So it's a little bit different arrangement. The Congress has by historical practice, if not technically, decided that congressmen or at least senators are not subject to impeachment. So it would simply be waiting until your term is up. You could be expelled unilaterally by by the House that you're a member
Now,
of.
that is possible. So
Yes.
you could be expelled. That would be an option. What I'm doing is probing as we enter this political cycle nearing its end, and we can imagine candidates might wind up in office that are a little shaky.
Never.
And it doesn't everywhere. I mean, and if those people are in there, that's pretty much it. It sounds like it's going to be hard to do much about it. If no matter what kind of job performance they have, there's no. We can't say there's no confidence in your actions. People would not routinely resign. Then we could go back to the Nixon situation.
Yes.
Maybe that's something worth talking about.
Yes.
Well,
Before we get to Nixon, I would say you're overlooking the most obvious thing, and that is the natural expiration of the term.
yes.
Now, I think the reason you overlooked that is because in this modern day and age, if you have a nuclear button, we have a sense of urgency that perhaps did not exist 100 or 200 years ago. That if you had a truly awful president, then presidents didn't do a great deal before
Yes,
Andrew
right,
Jackson.
right.
You could live with him for 3 years until the next election.
Sure. And
But,
many times the presidents they weren't in Washington. They were
Yes.
back in Monticello or whatever.
Yes,
Jefferson
or the
was.
Hermitage, or
Well, it was not there, but one half the time.
correct.
There,
But I did not mean to digress.
But just looking at the situation that we spoke of just now, with putting a person sort of out of office, how would that work? I mean, to do that. When the Nixon event occurred, he resigned, and if he had not resigned, would he have been impeached? And
Yes.
that was the threat, and so he just resigned rather than face that.
Yes, and that's really the reason he finally resigned. And this is one of the reasons you saw so much polarization, that Nixon hung on so long and so much came out that by the time the tapes had been made public and it showed that Nixon had ordered a cover-up, it never clearly showed that he ordered the break-in, but it was very clear he had ordered a cover-up right after the break-in, that he had been lying and that he had been obstructing justice. It had become crystal clear that he had lost practically all of his support in the House and that he would be impeached and that he almost certainly would be convicted. And so in an act which was probably an act that we don't appreciate sufficiently, he decided at that point to spare the country that and left. So
And would he have been impeached?
he would certainly have been impeached, and he almost certainly would have been convicted.
Now, I know you're an expert on the Bill Clinton affair, the Monica Lewinsky. What about that? I mean, that seems to be, as we look at the presidents in the past 50 years, we've had at least 2 episodes. That's
Yes.
a pretty substantial percentage of presidents that got into trouble. Now, the bill, why don't you take us through that, Bucky? I know you follow that case closely.
Yes.
As to what happened there and how Bill escaped when
Yes.
Nixon did not.
Well, the difference there was purely partisan, and he was not being impeached for having an extramarital affair. A lot of people claimed that was what was going on, and they would point to other presidents who retrospectively we know were involved in notorious affairs, John F. Kennedy, for instance.
Yes, right.
But what he would have been impeached for was, as the top law enforcement officer of the nation, and incidentally a licensed attorney,
Yes.
there were allegations that he had perjured himself while under oath
Yes.
during the investigation of various affairs, the Whitewater affair
right.
and various ethical probes. And I would, by the way, before I got further into that, I would point out that the reason why there is so much more concern over ethics is because you had so many lawyers behaving unethically and badly during the Nixon affair, that legal ethics was not a required course in law
Yes,
school until
yes.
after Watergate.
Yes.
And so when Bill Clinton apparently, according to the Republicans, lied and misled the public over the Monica Lewinsky affair, then at that point, once we got hard evidence, the House impeached him.
Yes.
And the Senate said, this is just a little lie about sex. The Democrats said we are not going to convict him about that. And you got a very heavily partisan vote on his conviction, and he was therefore naturally acquitted.
Yes, yes.
So-
Although he lost his law license, I believe. Is
He
that
did
what
lose
it's
his
barred?
he did lose his license to practice law. So yes.
And that does not prevent him from being appointed to the Supreme Court. Is that
No, it
right?
does not. You do not legally you do not have to be a licensed attorney to be a member of the Supreme Court.
Wow, that's quite a little story. Now, just to talk about the great number of politicians that are lawyers, there are huge numbers of them. And I wonder, just if I can make a slightly snide comment, with Hillary Clinton has gotten in some trouble with some of her, shall we say, dissimulations about different things that she said did or did not take place. Maybe she, when she went to Yale Law School, was she being taught legal ethics? And my joke is, you really think lawyers are and politicians are more honest than they used to be because they've been exposed to some ethical questions or ethical courses?
Well, the required legal ethics course is only a 2-hour course after
Yes.
all. I think the irony is that there are some parallels between the Hillary email server and the Nixon tapes. Obviously, as to how far those parallels go is a matter of dispute. I think it is. I don't think any sane person now can deny that Hillary Clinton has uttered, shall we say, untruths with regard to her email server. And since Hillary Clinton cut her teeth on
Yes.
the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives during the Watergate affair,
Yes.
I think it's just a delicious irony that here, 40 plus years later, we've got with her another question of presidential unethical behavior. And the rule seems to be, well, it's different if you're a Democrat. I don't know.
Well,
and
I
I'm
mean,
slamming the Democrats a bit here.
Just not that we're nearing the end of our
Yes.
conversation. We've gone around the bases quite a bit, but maybe we could just go slightly off subject with the idea that Machiavellian kind of ethics. Maybe that's what politicians need. In other words, a very righteous, truthful person is a good person, and you'd like to have that person as your friend and do business with that person, and presumably entrust the person. But in the national arena, isn't that almost a sine qua non of a politician to be sort of a Machiavellian figure and not exactly tell the truth, not exactly be honest? And
Yes.
if you're always honest and always tell the truth, are you at an enormous disadvantage in maximizing the affairs of the country?
Well, I think it depends on what you are choosing to be honest or dishonest about. My best example is if someone is interviewing the president live on 60 Minutes and says, Mr. President, do we have a mole in the Putin administration? If the president of the United States tells the truth that yes, that Putin's right-hand man is on the scene,
Yes.
you don't want truth in that circumstance. It compromises the national interest. But on the other hand, when you are lying about your credentials or your motivations to the people that you work for,
Yes.
I would say that that's a different matter.
So maybe the way to not do this is just not to have a press conference. I mean, if you believe that you're going to be
Like
tempted,
Hillary Clinton for the past 6
or
months.
no,
yes,
you hit the ball back, Bucky. But the idea is, if you believe that just knowing yourself that if you get in a corner, your instinct is just to prevaricate and not tell the truth, and your advisors tell you, well, if they come at you, you're probably going to spin some, untruth, and we're not going to let you be in that, and you'll immediately be found out, and we just say you can't be subjected to that.
Yes.
Because of your the way that you handle it.
Yes.
You can't have a press conference. You won't. You'll be undone if that happens.
Yes. Well, what does that do to responsible government? Once again, regarding if we get a Trump or a Hillary, these people are becoming a class distinct from us.
Yes.
And that is not little r Republican government, a government of Republican virtue.
Right.
We have become what we beheld, and then what's the point?
Well, as we conclude our conversation, I think we have to just keep an eye on these politicians. And also, I think many overseas observers would say one of the good things about Americans is they do, under these circumstances, get involved in the country's affairs, and I think everyone is doing that.
And we need to be knowledgeable about that. And I'd say that my last line of this is from the great iconic character V for Vendetta, that people should not be afraid of the government. Government should be afraid of the people.
Just so, Bucky.
Indeed.
Found that note. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your. We'll talk some more. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.